Did you know when you shave, 1/3 of what you remove is skin? So if you shave it, Dove it. With new Dove Advanced Care Antiperspirant Dry Spray. New Pro-Ceramide technology helps repair skin's natural barrier after shaving for soft, smooth underarms. The ultimate post-shave care with 72-hour sweat and odor protection. Try new Dove Advanced Care Antiperspirant Dry Spray from the #1 dermatologist recommended brand for everyday underarm care. Learn more and find where to shop at Dove.com.
High Five Casino lets you play your favorite slot and live table games like blackjack with the chance to redeem for real cash prizes. High Five Casino has a giant selection of over 1,200 games, including hundreds of exclusive games only found on High Five Casino. It's always free to play, and free coins are given out every 4 hours. Ready to have your own High Five moment? Visit highfivecasino.com. That's high, the number 5, casino.com. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited by law, must be 21 years or older. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome to True Crime Garage. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Nick, and with me, as always, is a man who once asked Marvin Gaye, "What's going on?" Here is the captain.
And he had the nerve not to reply to me. It's good to be seen and good to see you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend.
Today, we are very happy to be featuring judge, jury, and executioner by the fine folks at Ironfire Brewing Company. This is a delicious triple I to the P to the A. Very hoppy with 7 high alpha hop varieties from 3 continents. This IPA is for the extreme hop heads out there. ABV 11.2%. So drink this in your garage at home. Garage grade 4 out of 5 bottle caps. And let's give some thanks and praise to our good friends that helped us fill up the old garage fridge for this week. First up, a shout out to Sadie in Warren, Michigan.
And a big shout out to Kelly in sunny Tampa.
Next up, here's a cheers to Kimberly from Mount Scary, Maryland.
And a big shout out goes to Lisa W. in Bristol, Connecticut.
Next up, here's a cheers to Rose Austin in San Marcos, Texas. And last but certainly not least, we have a double-fisted cheers to Daniel and Tracy from Wichita, Kansas, who say, "Be excellent to each other." And we agree. Be excellent to each other. Everyone we just mentioned contributed to the beer fund, and for that, we thank you.
Yeah, PWERRUN Beer Run. You need more True Crime Garage for your earballs? Yes, you do. Your balls need more. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Record on Patreon or Apple Podcast subscription. And Colonel, that's enough of the business.
All right, everybody, gather around, grab a chair, grab a beer. Let's talk some true crime.
Powerful moments in these closing statements from both the state and the defense, words that will likely stick in this jury's mind as they deliberate. The state went first in their closing statements, telling the jury Bridge Guy is guilty of murder and Richard Allen is Bridge Guy. Nicholas McClellan told the jury that February 13th, 2017 was a day this community will never forget, saying it's the day Abby and Libby went to the trails for a walk and never returned. McClellan said in the hours of people searching for the girls, no one thought anything bad had happened, that this was a small community and these kind of things don't happen. McClellan pulled up pictures of the crime scene showing Abby and Libby's bodies, saying, quote, "This next picture is hard to see, but this is what they saw," recalling the moments the girls' bodies were found. McClellan played the video of Bridge Guy from Libby's phone, saying something told Libby she needed to take video of the man behind Abby that day. McClellan set up a timeline using witnesses who testified they saw Bridge Guy that day. He told the jury investigators knew, quote, "If we could find Bridge Guy, we could find the killer." When Richard Allen was arrested 5 years later, McClellan recalled what police found in Allen's home: a blue Carhartt jacket, a bullet in a memory box, and a Sig Sauer gun, calling it the Bridge Guy starter kit. The state also replayed 2 phone calls Richard Allen made from prison, the first confessing to his wife, the second telling his mom he killed the girls. McClellan told the jury, quote, "Richard Allen is Bridge Guy. Richard Allen used his gun to force the girls down the hill," also telling them, quote, "He slit their throats. He left behind his calling card, a bullet from his gun." McClellan called February 13th a day that Bridge Guy stole the youth and life away from Abby and Libby.
This here, Captain, feels like all eyes are looking at this situation. Everybody wants to know what's going on at the trial of Richard Allen, who is on trial for the double homicide of Libby German and Abigail Williams, who first went missing and then sadly were found dead in February of 2017 in Delphi, Indiana, and the now infamous case of the Monon High Bridge guy who everybody was looking for so long until the arrest of Richard Allen. And then after all of this time, we are now finally in the courtroom. We recorded an episode that everybody listened to not too long ago, just a few weeks back, about the start of the trial and some things that we were hoping that would come out during the course of that trial. And here we are once again reporting on this situation, which is the trial of Richard Allen, who is facing double murder charges in Carroll County, Indiana. And if the listeners remember, they had to bus in the jury from another county there in Indiana because of the concern that you wouldn't be able to find a jury that didn't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, because this is such a traumatic case and such a huge tragedy for this area in particular. And so many people paying attention to the news and putting ribbons on trees and around lampposts and such, trying and hoping and banding together to find the killer of these 2 young, beautiful ladies that were just out there trying to have a good time out in Mother Nature on a unseasonably warm day in February of 2017. Where we sit now, just to be clear here, unfortunately, we're not at a point where there's a verdict yet, and we are set to hear closing arguments. But for the sake of this podcast, we're bringing to you what we've been able to observe and the information we've been able to gather as far as the trial itself has taken place over the course of the last couple of weeks.
And we've been talking about this case from the beginning, 2017. So just to be clear, we would not qualify as jury members. They would rule us out immediately. So I think it's kind of difficult. This case is definitely difficult to look at with fresh eyes when we've been discussing it for so long.
Yeah. And the other thing that makes it very difficult too is our own curiosities, right? We've been throwing this thing under a microscope for so long and looking at it from so many different angles that when there was finally an arrest, and now that it's working its way through the trial process, I think that it's only human nature to want to know a lot of details about that day that are probably not very necessary for a conviction or acquittal. So for those that are hoping to get a absolute play-by-play on the day of Richard Allen and the day of the murder victims, and if he's guilty or innocent, and defining moments that could prove so or otherwise, it's a little dissatisfying at the end of the day. But that is typically what we will see time and time again with other cases as well. Once they do hit trial, you have a situation here. He's accused of a double homicide. He's pled not guilty, says that he's innocent. There are a plethora of confessions that he may or may not have made, depending on who you talk to, but it seems like he's made a good deal of them while his time waiting and leading up to this trial after he was behind bars. So we should probably set this up for people who have not been fully dialed in on this trial. It is taking place, as said, in Carroll County, which is in Delphi, Indiana. So this is a rather small courtroom. They've decided to go with first come, first served basis for people who can attend the court proceedings. And so there is a line that lines up rather quickly each and every day for this trial of people that want to get in. Some people that have a vested interest in the case. Maybe they are family members or extended family or friends of the families of the victims or the accused. And there's also people that have a vested interest because we said it a dozen times, maybe more, on True Crime Garage. This was not just a murder against these two poor kids, but also a crime against the community, the wonderful communities of Delphi, Indiana, and Carroll County, Indiana, at large as well. So a lot of people with a vested interest in the outcome and the actual proceedings of this trial as well. One thing, Captain, that is unique here, and this is something that we pointed out before it went to trial, and this to me was one of the more interesting angles potentially for this trial, and always has been with cases in Indiana for me, is Indiana is one of the states where you have a situation, a setup, where the jury is allowed to ask questions. And I find that to be so fascinating, but also refreshing. This is something that I wish that they would incorporate in more courtrooms throughout this country. I sat down the other night and I tried to come up with a list of pros and cons for why jury questioning is good or bad. And I couldn't, I think the pros significantly outweigh the cons in these cases. And I really couldn't find a whole lot of negative to say or suggest that the jury in all cases shouldn't be able to ask questions.
Yeah, I agree. And you've seen it a couple times where the jury is deliberating and they might want to see a piece of evidence again. So I've seen that in movies and documentaries. But obviously, like you said, we're not privy to be in this courtroom, so we don't know how many questions the jury asked or how that was received.
What I love about this, though, Captain, what I think works for this as far as getting transparency in these cases, look, if you don't have a situation where the jury can ask questions, you may have them, once they are in deliberation, talking amongst themselves, you can have infighting, you can have, and they could have a situation where they're not so clear. They don't have a clear, unified understanding of a detail of the crime or a detail about the suspect. Here, when the jury can ask a question, that allows them to clarify, to get clarification on different testimony throughout the trial. And as you said, evidence that could point toward innocence or guilt. The other thing that I think is interesting too, to kind of look at it from this angle, I think the jury questions could be helpful to both sides, both the prosecution and the defense. Because oftentimes as an attorney, when you are presenting your reasons why person A is guilty or innocent in a case, you don't know if just because you wrote it down correctly on your legal pad and you said it just right in the courtroom, if it really hit and resonated with each and every one of the jury members. It's a long day to sit there and listen to testimony and listen to attorneys and listen to objections. And if there are some key elements to your prosecution or to your defense, you want to make sure that that hits and resonates with each and every one of those jury members. I think it's helpful because if they stand up and ask certain questions, you go, okay, well, maybe they're leaning this way on this particular item, or maybe I didn't sell that enough. So next time I get an opportunity, I better come up with a different tactic. I think that it allows for a more thorough trial and hopefully a more thorough job by both the prosecution and defense.
Well, we're just two dum-dums in a garage, and we've done over 1,000 episodes and talked about many things. And there's many times we get comments back where you question, did this listener listen to the right episode? Because they took what I said, and I don't blame the listener. Sometimes there's just miscommunication, and sometimes we don't say things as clearly as we mean. So like you said, I agree. This is a really good thing. And I think sometimes we have two victims here, Abby and Libby, and I think they've got lost in the sauce a little bit.
Yeah.
And which is sad. But
Very
we also
sad.
have to remember that this guy, Richard Allen, he's innocent until proven guilty. And his life is on the line. His family's lives are on the line as well. And because the crime is so heinous that I think sometimes we go, well, who gives a shit about this scumbag?
Yeah, that can certainly be something that takes place and seems to be a matter of course a lot of times in these cases. But as you so astutely pointed out, that yes, he is innocent until proven guilty. The one thing here too is so many eyes and ears on this case for so many months and then years. And when he was arrested, we were able to tear through the arrest affidavit, the search warrant information, and that really showed us the evidence that they were working with to lead them to an arrest of Richard Allen. And it hinted at what we might see at the trial. Now, the trial, of course, opened up with opening arguments, which, to put it short and sweet, the prosecution comes out and says, Bridge Guy killed these girls. Richard Allen is Bridge Guy, and this case is about him, a man on a bridge, and a bullet that was found, and of course a cell phone. But so much has been discussed about that cell phone footage over the years that, and one thing that we've said for the longest time is, while that cell phone image of Bridge Guy, of the man walking across the bridge that approaches the girls shortly before they are moved and then assaulted and killed, that image isn't good enough that you can look at it and go, okay, I know exactly who did this. It's just good enough that you can eliminate a certain portion of the population. The bullet, however, if the science is true and if what the prosecution is stating is absolutely true, is a different scenario.
And I hate when people say that it's junk science. It's not junk science. There is some science to it.
It to me, it's overly dismissive to just say it's junk science. This is not the first trial where they've used ballistics. This will not be the last trial.
Well, the expert for the prosecution, I believe she's been called hundreds and hundreds of times.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, this is one argument that I don't like, that many people say, and maybe we've danced on this before, but with people, well, it was 5.5 years. The pressure was really on law enforcement to solve this and to find some guy that they could accuse of doing it.
Right.
Yeah, that pressure was on them the day after the murders, too. The pressure didn't build the longer it dragged out.
No, I'd actually say it dissipated.
And they would want to be looking for the right guy all along, because guess what? If the pressure had gotten to them at any point in this, they would have arrested a different guy. They had people that were damn near convicted in the public eye for this that are not facing trial today for the murders. So to me, if people are going to be overly dismissive in saying the bullet's junk science, then I think it's only fair that I'm overly dismissive for the people that argue, well, it was 5.5 years. They had to arrest somebody.
Well, and we've had a lot of speculation in this case. I mean, we had a big turning point when law enforcement released a second sketch that looked completely different than the first sketch. And so because of that speculation, I think people go, well, this investigation was awful. And what we speculated back then, years ago, was maybe that there was just too many cooks in the kitchen. Because if me and you go interview 10 people, we're going to know the demeanor, we're going to know the context of the conversation, we're going to understand our notes. But when you have so many investigators involved and what happened in this trial, and I think this is important, his name is mislabeled, adding his street name to the last name. And when it was refiled and they go, wait, here's this guy that came forward and told us not only was he at the park, but he was on the bridge that day. So we got a handful of people at that park that day, but we only have a couple people claiming to even be on the bridge. And that's important. And this guy claims he was on the bridge. And then once they figured out that this file was just mislabeled, within 5 weeks of them having that filed correctly, they had Richard Allen arrested.
Yeah. So from my understanding here, Captain, the information they had, the mislabel was, the information was listed as Richard Allen Whiteman.
Right. And
you can see how this lends itself to be a little confusing. One could easily look at that and assume that Allen, I'm sure there's probably a dozen people listening to us right now that their middle name is Allen. And so his last name fits as a potential first name or last name here, or middle name, I should say,
right.
And simply labeled Richard Allen Whiteman. And so that person doesn't exist. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's probably very likely a Richard Whiteman out there. Right.
Sorry, Richard Whiteman.
Free Richard Whiteman. Richard Whiteman. But yeah, that's how it got labeled and mislabeled. And things like that do happen, unfortunately, in these cases. And not just too many cooks in the kitchen as far as law enforcement go, but there's no way that you're not going to go, this is an all hands on deck situation. So of course there's going to be a lot of cooks in said kitchen, but also when you factor in the potential of eyewitnesses for that day. These murders took place in a public place that anybody in the public, for the most part, had access to. And therefore, there's a lot of canvassing that has to go on. And there is private property or properties that are near here as well. So there's a lot of canvassing that has to go on, and you have to kind of corral everybody that was there that day or claims to be there that day, because I'm sure that they dealt with that as well.
Right. And people online, when people make this argument, well, Richard Allen came forward and talked to the police, so why would a killer do that? Well, we've seen that happen in many cases, that the killer wants to be involved or feels like if they have conversation with law enforcement that they'll be able to get ahead of the investigation.
Well, in the two different composite sketches that are put together by different potential eyewitnesses there on the trails that day near the Monon High Bridge, don't overreact, because this is not the only case where we've seen a different composite sketch. We've actually, I would say, I could probably put the number between 20 and 25 cases where there's been more than one composite sketch. And in some cases, in very few, but in some, I've seen more than just two composite sketches. And I'm talking about some cases that are solved, that have been adjudicated.
Well, and just to be frank, though, when they released the second sketch and then law enforcement got a lot of criticism with it, look, at the end of the day, the first sketch when they arrested Richard Allen, to me, he could pass for the first sketch.
Yes.
He looks nothing like the second sketch, and I thought it was an unintelligent comment or thought process by law enforcement. Instead of just saying, well, we messed up, or there might have been a lead or something, and we could dive deeper into that on what my theory would be on why they released the second sketch. But because they held back that information, their comments to the public were, well, he could be a mixture of the two. I just thought that was a stupid remark. And when you have a guy that you arrested, he looks like the first sketch. And I think because of those comments and because they weren't transparent on the reasoning, now they said that they were transparent with the family, so maybe they would know, they'd be privy to that information, but we're not. And I think that raises questions. But to me, at the end of the day, we have somebody that was at the park. He was arrested. He looks like the first sketch. So to me, you could check that box off of, well, that makes sense.
Well, and I think, and this is just my own opinion here, but I think that they, based off of eyewitnesses, potential eyewitnesses, and the cell phone footage of Bridge Guy, I think they were really confused about the age of the perpetrator. I think that might be in part what led to the second sketch as well. But
my theory is that, and here's what we know: we have individuals that have come out on social media and say, I was on the bridge that day at this time. And so it's very likely that somebody saw them entering the bridge entrance or exiting the bridge. And so when they initially release the sketch of who they think it is, and I think you can look at the first sketch that was released to the public and look at the video and go, well, okay, that makes some sense. I can see that individual roughly in the video. And then when they release the second sketch, you're like, I just don't see the second sketch lining up at all with the video. But again, the quality of the video is shit. We all know that. The quality of the video is shit. So, and the quality of the picture that they took from the video is shit. But when you have individuals coming out and saying, well, I was on the bridge, that's, to me, the reason that they pivoted to a different sketch, because I think that sketch was of somebody that they knew factually was on that bridge that day. That's just my theory.
Or as you were saying, could have been somebody seen coming or going from the trailhead, which doesn't necessarily mean that they had to go to the bridge, but we do know the trailhead does lead to the bridge. So
yes. And if I come off a little heated in this episode, it's just the way it is. This is the case that we've been covering since 2017. It's frustrating and it's sad that the victims are getting lost in this whole case. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I'd like to take a moment to thank my partner in crime, Nick. He shows up every week and is always respectful of the victims. It's been an honor to work with him. This month is all about gratitude, and along with thanking my partner in crime, there's another person we don't get to thank enough: ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we are trying our best to make sense of everything in this crazy world. And it isn't easy. Here's a reminder to send some thanks to people in your life, including yourself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/garage today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/garage. This show is proudly sponsored by BetterHelp.
With big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. Somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price magically skyrockets. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about gotchas again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. Not to name names, but I have had mobile providers in the past that have a less than reliable service that I have paid much more than Mint Mobile. Like you, I was tired of complicated bills that included new fees and upcharges that made absolutely no sense. Mint Mobile is straight up. Great reliable service at a great and fair price. All Mint Mobile plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone number, and all of your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/TCG. That's mintmobile.com/TCG. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/TCG. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Is your sock drawer looking like a crime scene? Refresh it with Bombas, the most comfortable socks in the history of feet. Bombas is the perfect holiday gift for your work bestie, cousin, or that super picky friend, because no one says no to the snug and great feeling of new socks. Don't be surprised if you end up keeping a few things for yourself, though, because Bombas uses the coziest fabrics. But my favorite thing Bombas makes is hands and feet down their slippers. They're designed with marshmallow-like memory foam and are all wrapped up in Sherpa. Once you put them on, you'll never want to wear real shoes again. Bombas has become my go-to for sock shopping. Bombas.com is where I go to get my socks. They're also my cheat code, because if you get the ankle socks, they're great for the gym. They're great for everyday use. You get the half ankle sock. That one is good enough for me to wear at a business casual event or a black tie event, and they look like dress socks, but they feel like performance socks. Super cozy. So ready to feel good and do good? Head over to bombas.com/truecrimegarage and use code truecrimegarage for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/truecrimegarage, code truecrimegarage at checkout. It's on the bathroom floor. It's permanently stuck in the vacuum. You find it on your pillow. It's your hair. The never-ending shedding is real. That's why you've got to try Vegamore's brand new Grow Active Plus Advanced Hair System. It's made with clean ingredients and was co-developed by dermatologists, so you know it's legit and delivers real results. In a clinical study, the Grow Active Plus Advanced Hair Serum reduced shedding by up to 87% and improved hair density when used daily for 4 months. It has skincare-inspired ingredients like Spanish microalgae, which is a probiotic scalp superfood that nurtures the skin barrier. Vegamore used artificial intelligence to find 2 super potent hair densifying compounds, Japanese beauty berry and encapsulated Ropontic rhubarb. These 2 plant compounds form Vegamore's patent-pending Grow Active Plus complex. And can men use Vegamore? Absolutely. They clinically tested their new Grow Advanced system on both men and women to ensure efficiency across the board. And I can tell you this, I am seeing a visible increase in hair density, a visible reduction in hair thinning, and, important to me, my scalp feels very hydrated. All of this in just 90 to 120 days. Give it a try. Take on the most advanced approach to hair wellness with Vegamore's new Grow Active Plus Advanced System. Learn more at vegamore.com now. That's vegamor.com/garage, code garage to save 20% on your first order. vegamor.com/garage, code garage.
All right, we are back. Cheers, mates. Tall cans in the air. Cheers to you, Colonel.
And cheers to everybody out there in listener land. So the prosecution opens up this case, opens up the trial. Some of the people that we hear from first or early on is Richard Allen's family. His wife, Kathy, we hear from his daughter. Both of them will testify. From everything I've read and heard regarding the daughter's testimony, she's saying she was never molested by her father. She loves her father very much, but would not lie on the stand to defend him. So very matter-of-fact type of questions and answers going back and forth, especially with the daughter who was not living with the Allens at the time of this case. So really no surprises there. We do get a little bit of insight, maybe not as much as we had wanted, about Richard Allen's day that day on February 13th, 2017. And in full disclosure here, Captain, what I'm reporting today is essentially hearsay. I was not in the courtroom. Right. We talked about the complications of being in the courtroom. The line was filling up the night before. And then as this case and trial went by day after day, it was getting to the point where people that were in the courtroom at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday were too late to be in line for the Wednesday morning session. That's how many people were lining up to get into this courtroom. So I'm reporting all of this, and the sources that I've used. There's so many people reporting on this that I wanted to make sure that I was sticking with the same sources throughout. My daily has been the Carroll County Comet, which is the county newspaper there. Anyone that's read my book, The Delphi Murders, they know that receiving that newspaper weekly was something that I had signed up for a long time ago to keep an eye on the case. And this is how dumb I am. I even thought that maybe in some weird way I might see the picture of this man in that newspaper at some point. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that was dumb enough to think on that level. We know people on the internet were looking for him on Facebook like nobody's business. So that was one of my sources. The murder sheet has been valuable as well, but I've leaned toward the comment more because I don't want to say it's less biased, because I don't find the Anya and Kevin on the murder sheet to be picking a side. That wouldn't be my opinion of their coverage. I think that they've been able to get in the courtroom most of the time, and they are able to report on what they are seeing and hearing.
Some of the comments that I have seen online about Murder Sheet is that maybe they're too close to the case, or they're too invested in the case. And I think that's a fair assessment from listeners in the podcast world.
And in their defense, we might be as well. As you said, we've been covering this case on and off since May of 2017. We were one of the first to do it because a lot of podcasters shied away from it because there was just no information. There was no story to tell. A couple girls went missing. We don't know anything about their murders, and they're unsolved. That was the story in May of 2017. We hear from Richard Allen's family. The day in question, do I have this right, Captain? He goes to his mother's house, and I believe he meets his sister there.
Yeah.
And at some point early in the day, prior to arriving at the Monon High Bridge and the trailhead there in Delphi, he consumes 3 beers.
Yeah.
Something of that.
And, maybe this is true, maybe it's not true, but when I tell a story and I go, well, I was at this bar and this fight broke out, and I was only 3 beers deep. I was normally 6 at that point. So he consumed some alcohol. Yes. I don't know if I believe it was 3 or more. I don't know if that really matters, but Richard Allen tells us that he was at the park that day. Not only does he say that in confessions, but he also told the police, he came forward and said, I was at the park the day, not just at the park, but I was also on the bridge that day. And I think I didn't
kill the girls. I'm sorry, because the only thing I'm trying to make clear here, and this is probably a moot point because most of the people listening today have listened and know this case very well, but I think one thing that really separates this case from many others out there is that he is not denying being near the crime scene. That is right. In most cases, the prosecution, and before an arrest is even made, law enforcement has to be able to put the bad guy or the person that they think is the bad guy at the crime scene. Here, they don't have to do that. Now, there's a little question about the timing of everything, but he is physically putting himself at the crime scene on the day that the crimes occurred.
Yeah, I think here's the questions. It's what, when, where, who, how, and why. And the what is the murders. So where, the park, the bridge. We have to place the killer on the bridge. He places himself on the bridge. So when we say where, is Richard Allen, can he be a suspect because he was at the park? Yes, he can be a suspect because he was at the park. And we have evidence to back this up. Not just his word, but we also have video footage of his car entering and exiting basically the park. So now we have not just his word, but we have evidence to back up that it's factual, that he was there that day, the day these two girls were murdered. He was on the bridge that day that the two girls were murdered. That's factual.
I was going to try to stay on the prosecution and then go to the defense, but if you allow me to, since we're on this topic right now, if you allow me to jump around, let's
just make this a giant bowl of poop soup.
Well, and I have that recipe for anybody out there if you are curious.
Okay,
we're happy to pass that along.
We'll post that at truecrimegarage.com.
Yeah, mouths are watering. All right. So as far as the question about his vehicle goes, there was a lot of thought that maybe because the manner of egress, how the killer got to the trail system, how the killer exited the trail system was always in question. People thought, could it be the trailhead? Could it be the Freedom Bridge? Could it be the graveyard? What about this car that was parked over by the abandoned old child services building that's nearby?
Yeah.
You know what's crazy to me is like that seemed to be that little nugget that was not the centerpiece of any story or any press conference, but it was always kind of included, right? Like it always was like, oh, and we would like to talk to the driver of a car that was parked near the old abandoned child services building.
Right.
And so a lot of people, and part of this trial is trying to determine if that was Richard Allen's vehicle that was parked near that building. You have some people that are presenting testimony that it seems likely that it was his vehicle there. I think one person at the trial was even saying something like it was parked strangely, like parked in a manner that looked like somebody wanted to get away quickly.
But
then you have other witnesses that describe the vehicle, and in their description doesn't look anything like. I don't think anybody could say that it would be similar to his Ford Focus. So the family owned a couple of vehicles, and it's law enforcement has put forth, and the prosecution has put forth the idea that Richard Allen was driving the Ford Focus, the family's Ford Focus, on the day in question. And there are some people that give a description that one could say would match a Ford Focus. There's also camera footage from a nearby store. I think it's called something Harvest, that sees a similar vehicle to a Ford Focus that would be traveling in a direction toward the trails. Doesn't mean that they had to go to the trails. Traveling in a direction toward the trails and then leaving in the opposite direction. This would be after the time before the abduction and murders took place, and then seen after it's believed that the abductions and murders took place. Here's the very big difference from my understanding in regard to the camera footage versus the eyewitnesses' statements about this vehicle that was parked at the abandoned building. What I've been told by law enforcement is that the Ford Focus in the video, they say one thing that would set Richard Allen's Ford Focus apart from the thousands and thousands of others, of course, will be color, but also that he has aftermarket
Different
rims,
different
rims. So they're saying that makes this vehicle not one of one, but it certainly makes it much more unique. Now, if you cross-reference and compare that to the eyewitness statements about the vehicle parked at the abandoned building, if you were to get all these people and put them in the room at the same time, they're not going to be able to agree on the description of this vehicle. And therefore, the defense is saying, well, that needs to put into question for you out there, was this Richard Allen's vehicle or not? To me, I go, I don't understand what we're saying here, because he's already said he was at the crime scene. So
Right.
we don't need to mess around with this vehicle to put him at the crime scene. I guess, as you always say, Captain, and I agree, the devil's in the details. And here it would really boil down to, well, how long was he at the crime scene, and when did he arrive, and when did he leave? Which you might be able to determine that based off of the vehicle information.
Yeah, I think the other thing here that I don't understand why the prosecution didn't push this issue more, and we've talked about this in the past, is Bridge Guy is very short for a man, for an average adult. So the fact that Richard Allen falls into that description, not only just in his height, but also weight. And then on top of that, he's also admitted to wearing clothes similar to what he claims as similar to Bridge Guy. And so you go, okay, well, he was at the park, he was on the bridge, he was wearing clothes that were similar, same height as Bridge Guy, he's about the same weight as Bridge Guy. It's kind of hard to tell because of the video quality. I don't understand why they didn't push that more, but again, I'm not privy to every.
Well, no, but we've been told, and what we've been
Right.
told, and this is fairly recent, is that they couldn't, just like my suspicion about the age, they couldn't agree on the height, and it was a question of 2 inches. Now, but you got to keep in mind that 2 inches can go either way. So essentially, you
Right.
have a question of 4 inches, and now you've not done a great job of narrowing it down. And
Right.
so that was something that was probably, I bet you, led to some heated arguments behind closed doors, what to do with that information.
Yeah, so just to be clear where I stand so far, he's there. We know that. Again, I think this arguing about the car and all that nonsense, I think I don't really understand the point other than maybe the timeline, because he said he was there. So now are we just trying to completely change the argument and say he wasn't there? And then the other thing too is some of this other evidence that the defense releases later, you would go, well, you would want his car leaving at a certain time based on the evidence that they try to point out. So he's there, he's on the bridge. Again, we only have a couple dozen people that were at the park that day, but as far as eyewitnesses go, or people that were at the park that came forward and talked to law enforcement, we only have a few individuals that claim to have been near or on that bridge that day.
Yeah, and I think my opinion of what, and my understanding of the way that the courtroom proceedings took place, I think that the prosecution did a good job here. Now, did they present an open and shut case? No, they did not. But they presented a case with the evidence that they have. And I thought that they did a good job of also getting ahead of some things in the case, right? Like some
Richard Allen's
family was called before the defense got their turn. And so they're already talking about his day. There was a lot of talk and discussion about, and I believe that this was the defense that was bringing forth the mental and emotional makeup of Richard Allen.
Yeah.
Some of that was discussed by the prosecution, though, too, because we had a counselor or psychologist that was working with Allen while he was in jail waiting for trial. So we get kind of what I view as conflicting reports a little bit here. It sounds like he had some difficulties, or at least that's what the defense presents quite a bit here.
Seems like he had some issues with alcoholism as well.
He had some alcoholism issues, something about being terrified of conflict, and it's stated that there's some sexual abuse in his past and that he was the victim. Do I have that correct?
I believe so. And I think
they were very vague about that from my understanding.
I understand why the defense called younger females that are a part of Richard Allen's life. They put them on the stand to say he didn't sexually molest them. But again, I understand why they did it, but I think with mental health and our lack of understanding of it, and mental health affects every individual completely different. Some people need to be medicated. Some people don't. It's a conversation it's a topic that we probably should be talking more openly about it. We've tried to do that on the show, but here's what we do know. When you have people wrestling with mental issues, they're more likely to be suicidal and homicidal. So I just think, I know that they're trying to set up this narrative that, well, all these confessions are false because he was just mentally unstable. But they also try to present it as he was only mentally unstable because of the conditions that he was put in. But it's like, but you're also saying that he was mentally unstable before then. So, and then you have to be somewhat mentally unstable to commit a crime like this. And you have to be clear, because what we've learned, that these victims, Abby and Libby, I don't know if you heard about the way the marks and the cuts on their neck, but this is not just one cut and walk away. These were multiple cuts. We have vertical cuts, we have horizontal cuts, and you'd have to be somewhat mentally unstable to commit a crime like this.
Well, and we've had weeks of trial, and I got to say this, Captain, even after weeks of trial, I don't feel like as good of a job or as best of a job as I believe that the prosecution could do here. They put together and they rolled out their case for the jury to consume, to ponder, to digest, and then to arrive at a verdict. And their case is basically, this guy was there. He doesn't look unlike Bridge Guy. He was dressed like Bridge Guy. Bridge Guy killed the girls.
Yeah.
And we found a Bridge Guy. Well, excellent. Let's circle back to that. But the bullet that we found but it's described in some news outlets as found between the two victims, matches a bullet that came from, ballistically, we can tie this to his Sig Sauer gun. And then on top of that, he has openly said in interrogations or questioning, whatever you want to call it, with law enforcement, that he owned a Sig Sauer. He's never lent it to anybody ever for any reason at all. And yes, he regularly carries it with him when he goes to those trails, and he often keeps a round chambered.
Yes. And then on top of that, the matched ammo that he had at his house. And I think this is important too, because they found another bullet that was, I believe, on his nightstand or on the nightstand inside a memory box. But that was another bullet that was chambered at one point in his gun. So it would have similar markings as the one found at the crime scene. But he states in one of his confessions that, he's telling the victims, he's telling Abby and Libby, I got a gun. He says at some point he cocks it at the top of the bridge, on the other side of the bridge. And so if you go, we have two bullets, one at the crime scene, one at his house, both chambered at some point. But he can tell you about the first time that he cocked that gun, maybe he did find that bullet, and that's the one on his nightstand. And then the other one he didn't find.
Yes.
And that was the one found underneath Or again, like you said, I mean, there's conflicting reports. I don't know. It wasn't clear to me. Did they find the bullet between the victims, or was it found underneath one of the victims' foot?
Yeah, and the part of that too is the description of the murder scene where the girls were found, and some of the evidence that was found there, physical evidence. One being Libby's phone, which we know was found underneath of Libby. And so here's the thing: if he's saying, "Well, I cycled around or racked around at the top of the bridge," well, that certainly doesn't mean that he's innocent, number one. And number two, it actually strongly points towards his guilt, because now he's already talking about moving the victims, which we know. I keep saying abduction, but that's the definition, the legal definition of abduction. You are placing these people, in this situation, children. You're placing two children who feel scared to death, scared for their lives, and now you're moving them to a place that they do not want to go to. And in fact, just being in your presence is a place that they do not want to be. And here's the thing. I've said this a dozen times on the show. I own guns. I'm not a gun expert. I know where the bullets go and how to pull the trigger, much like I own a vehicle, but I can't take it apart and put it back together again.
Yes.
The captain's witnessed that. I took it apart.
and it's still
it remains apart.
Looking at it right now, it's a pile of shit.
What the captain's talking about here is, if he had to tell the victims, gesture to the victims, look, I mean business, right? Rack that gun, and now they are under your control. What that's going to do is, as soon as he does that, that's going to spit that cartridge out the side of that gun, and it's going to immediately put another one in the chamber. Right. So both could be true. He could have done that at the top of the bridge, and they may have never, maybe he recovered it, maybe they never found it, maybe they being law enforcement and people processing the scene.
Right.
But he could have unwillingly or even unknowingly racked another one during the course of a physical altercation with one or both of the victims, or in some kind of fit, done it again himself.
Yeah.
With not clear memory or understanding that he did it. The thing here is the road I was going down, and I know that this is a really of no use at all, but I can't help it. It's from my own obsession with this case, and having looked at it so many times. You looked at it so many times. You and I have discussed this so many times. I cannot tell the listeners how many times we've talked about this case off mic.
Well, and just to be honest, I think I told you the other week, I can't wait for this trial to be over, and I can't wait for the election to be over, because I was having I struggle with my own demons, and I was having a hard time not just sitting around and sifting through updates and listening to other podcasts and listening to I think her name is Pat Brown, the FBI profiler, and and just not taking care of myself, and because I'm so fascinated with this case, but it was making me physically sick. And I think people have the right to question, did they put on a strong enough case? But I think all this evidence is really hard to digest when we're looking at it from a bird's eye view. Want to thank everybody for joining us here in the garage. Right now at truecrimegarage.com, we have a hoodie pre-sale, so make sure you get those in time for Christmas. Join us back in the garage for part 2. Until then, be good, be kind, and don't litter.
Hi there, it's Andy Richter, and I'm here to tell you about my podcast, The 3 Questions with Andy Richter. Each week, I invite friends, comedians, actors, and musicians to discuss these 3 questions. Where do you come from? Where are you going? And what have you learned? New episodes are out every Tuesday with guests like Julie Bowen, Ted Danson, Tig Notaro, Will Arnett, Phoebe Bridgers, and more. You can also tune in for my weekly Andy Richter Call-In Show episodes, where me and a special guest invite callers to weigh in on topics like dating disasters, bad teachers, and lots more. Listen to The 3 Questions with Andy Richter wherever you get your podcasts.